I'd like to call the meeting to order. We'll start in just a minute. I will say, although seeing some of the faces here, you've heard this before, but I will briefly just remind everybody of a couple things. One, as the Planning Commission, you should understand our role. There is the Town Council. We are appointed, they are elected. They tend to be the lawmakers. We tend to be the appliers of the law. That's not strictly correct, but it's helpful, I think, to think of it that way. This evening, everyone will have an opportunity to speak. We begin the meeting with a public comment, which is on anything you want to talk about for up to 3 minutes. It is not something, however, that we can respond to, but we certainly will listen to you. When we get into the agenda, if you would fill out a card, which should be behind each of the benches, and let us know what agenda item you'd like to speak to, that would be very helpful to us. The applicant will get up to 5 minutes, response up to 3, and then the rebuttal is up to 3. And I think that is sufficient for what we're going to do this evening, and I would just give you the habitual request that if you have something that makes noise, like a cell phone, you silence it, which reminds me, mine's in my pocket. All right, that being done, I would ask that we take the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Erickson?
Here.
Commissioners Jensen?
Here.
Commissioner Sayoc?
Here.
Commissioner Talasford?
Here.
Vice Chair Bourgeois?
Here.
Chairman O'Donnell?
Here.
And Commissioner Machichi has an excused absence, and we have a quorum.
All right. Let's stand and pledge allegiance. I will lead it this evening. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This evening we have 2 sets of minutes, and I would request that if we have any comments about the minutes, we take them separately. If, on the other hand, we have a motion now on either of them or both of them, you could make that motion now. So any questions or any motion? Yes, Commissioner Jensen?
I can make a motion to approve the minutes of June 24th, but need to advise the chair that I was absent on July 8th, and I'm going to recuse myself.
Is there a second on the minutes for the 24th?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Now we have the second set of minutes. May we have a motion on that? Commissioner Talasford?
Yes, I will move to approve the minutes for July 8th. There you go.
That's your second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
It passes unanimously. Are there any written communications?
You have one desk item before you tonight.
All right, and the record, I think, should reflect that we have a desk item on agenda item number 2, 26 Alpine Avenue, which I think we'll specifically mention when we get to that agenda item. There is one requested continuance, and that is of agenda item number 1 relating to 15928 Union Avenue. Unless someone wants it taken off of that or otherwise considered, may I have a motion? Commissioner Bourgeois?
I move to continue item number 1 to the August 26th meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Erickson. All those in favor? Aye. Passes unanimously. So, subcommittee reports. I believe Commissioner Bourgeois has a subcommittee report.
Thank you, Chair O'Donnell. Last night, the General Plan Committee met, and we reviewed the housing element goals, policies, and implementing strategies, and we looked at revisions to existing ones and discussed proposed new goals and policies. And we did not quite make it all the way through our agenda for the evening. We still need to discuss affordable housing overlay zone, and that is being continued to 2 weeks from today.
Thank you. Any other reports? All right, there being none. I guess we would come to the first agenda item. May we have a staff report? Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot. Verbal communications. So, thank you. So, we have one card, and I'm Citizen Ray, how could I forget? So we'll ask you to step forward.
Mr. Chairman, you saved yourself just in the nick of time.
I did get help.
I have 5 minutes speech and report.
Well, I'm sure you'll condense it.
Oh, just a couple of thoughts. First off, look at the crowd tonight. The public meeting, the Planning Commission. Besides the applicant, there's only 1 or 2, 3 people. You go down to the plaza downtown here, and there are thousands down there. Thousands waiting to hear the free music. And what they say about the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, about free bread and free circuses, led to the downfall of the Roman Empire. Should we draw any correlation between those thoughts and what we see happening here in Los Gatos? Public meeting with all the import that it has, the Planning Commission. 3 people. A huge crowd down there for the free circus. I'll leave that thought with you, okay? And here I am, one guy out of 30,500 in Los Gatos. There's one guy that takes the public interest to heart and comes down and acts as a homeowner association. I've never lived in a community where there's such disinterest in the public interest. Never. All my life. It continues to blow my mind. More food for thought. Okay? Lastly, the good news is the town council, in my estimation, did on a 4-to-1 vote, Steve Rice voted against it, adopted the leadership group Climate Change Collaborative. And I've read that document 3 times. It's a little trick I learned from my neighbor in Orinda who was an attorney. Read everything 3 times and you will get it all. And he was so right. I have read that document 3 times. I cannot find any instance of self-serving dollar bill consideration by this, what I always thought was just a glorified Chamber of Commerce, this leadership group. They are taking the public interest 100% this time, as so stated in the document that I left with Mr. Erickson here. So I would urge each one of you to get a copy of it, okay? Why they bypassed the Planning Commission on this terribly important environmental document, I will never know.
Citizen Ray, let me stop for 1 second. Apparently the timing is malfunctioning, which is certainly not your fault.
Really? It's working in my favor?
It's not working in
Wonderful.
your favor or against your favor. It's not working. So why don't you take the next, Citizen Ray, if you listen, it will help you. If you take the next 30 seconds, 'cause I don't know what time you've got, but I know you've been more than 3 minutes, we'd appreciate that.
Yes, of course. Done. Always willing to go along, with common sense and good governance. Always willing.
Thank you. I think we're now moving to item number 2. Item number 1 having been continued.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Interim Community Development Assistant Director Sandy Bailey will be presenting the report.
Thank you, Chairman O'Donnell and members of the Commission. I'd like to point out that there is a desk item concerning this matter. For those who are interested, the copies are over here, and it is a email with a photograph from a concerned neighbor. The applicant is requesting approval to construct a 2,500 square foot multi-level single-family residence with a 1,300 square foot cellar and an attached 740 square foot two-car garage. This matter was considered by the Planning Commission on May 27th and was continued with the direction that the applicant look at reducing the mass of the south elevation and to reduce the height of the retaining wall of the auto court. The applicant has revised the plans to reduce the height of the auto court retaining wall. The previous plans, the retaining wall had a height ranging from 2 to 9 feet. The current plans have a height which ranged from 1 to 7 feet. The applicant did discuss with staff the possibility of reducing the length of the house by 14 feet, and the area that was to be removed was proposed to be shifted to the north side of the house in the patio area. Although this idea was raised by the applicant, it is not an alternative that the applicant is wishing to pursue. The applicant's justification for making no additional changes to the plans are as follows. More grading would be created. There would be an increase in construction traffic related to the increase in grading. The heights of the retaining walls at the rear of the house will be increased. There will be an increase in pressures on upper walls and trees could be impacted. There will be a loss of rear yard, which would increase the need for decks on the downhill elevation, and added decks to the downhill elevation would increase the mass. Staff had recommended that the applicant should provide quantity information to further justify the grading impacts that they had addressed, yet this information has not been provided. Staff supports the modifications proposed to reduce the height of the auto court retaining wall. However, staff does not believe that the applicant has provided sufficient justification or effort to support not making additional changes to the plan to reduce the mass of the south elevation. Since the applicant has not provided this information and because they are not interested in changing the plans and wish to proceed with the project as proposed, we therefore recommend that the Commission deny the application. And that concludes staff's presentation.
Are there questions of staff? Commissioner Bourgeois?
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. In your conversations with the applicant, it seems like all the conversations centered around shifting around square footage from one portion of the property to another. Or was it ever discussed of actually just reducing the size?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, before I ask the applicant to come forward, I would remind everyone who wants to speak tonight that I received 2 cards on this, which did not include the applicant. I'm going to assume the applicant wants to talk, but I would appreciate it if you would fill out a card when you're through and just leave it for the record. And if anybody else wants to speak on any item tonight, I'd appreciate it if you would fill out a card. Also, it appears that our timing device may not be working, and to that extent, we have a fail-safe town attorney here. And he is going to keep the time, and if indeed it appears that is not working, he will let you know when there's 30 seconds to go? I will. Okay. How he'll do that, we'll all stand by to see. All right, so I would ask the applicant to come forward.
And the applicant will get 5 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Barry Barnes, applicant 26 Alpine. At our last meeting, the biggest things I remembered that were concerning the commission was the height of the auto court and reducing the size of it. We did that. We reduced the height of the court by 2 feet. We reduced the size of the auto court by anywhere from up to 5 feet in depth. We reduced it by roughly 15%. We lost some off-street parking, but this is what staff was wishing us to do, and so we did it. We changed the garage from a 3-car garage to a 2, and then staff recommended that we add a 3rd door, a smaller door for like bike storage and this kind of stuff, which we did. They also asked for a window to be added in that side of the garage, which we did. And then they asked for if we could see about cutting 14 feet off the length of the house. I pursued that and then looked at how I could move that footage into the patio area like staff had asked. Every 1 foot back into that area would create an extra 15 yards of export. And to replace the square footage, we would be going back and taking about 225 more yards of dirt, which generates about, another 75 truckloads out of there. Plus, when the house was designed, we designed it to do the minimum amount of grading. We did not ever pursue maximum grading. We tried to fit it into the natural grade lines of the lot. We stayed within all the guidelines and the FARs, the heights. One of the neighbors had said that he thought my house was too tall. I'm 2 stories on the downhill side. The type of grading we're doing will reduce the downhill elevation. The one that was approved by Planning Commission up the street at 52 Oak Hill has a 3-story coming down the back. That's going to be visible from the street right behind City Hall. We kept ours at 2-story because, again, it fits into the hillside, into the natural terrain. I think we've worked with staff over the last 5 years to make everything work. We've worked with Public Works to reduce the grading. We've worked with town geologists and gone out and do extra borings. We've worked with the arborist to make sure that any specimen trees were preserved. We've worked through the riparian corridor to make sure there was nothing encroaching into it, out of the creek to stay out of it, and everything near it. We've controlled the water going towards our neighbor by collecting it and taking it to the creek. If the soils engineer would agree to it, we could put pavers in the auto court, which would let some of the water go down in. So I think they're saying that's my time.
No,
Okay. We've tried to work with staff on everything we can. There's just certain things that this particular site designs itself to, which is what we did with the design, fitting it into the natural terrain. That's the only way you can keep a downhill site to a 2-story on the downhill side instead of 3. So I think if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
Thank you. Are there questions of the speaker? Yes, Commissioner Jensen.
Mr. Barnes, I just wanted to follow up on Commissioner Bourgeois' question to staff. Did you give any consideration to actually reducing the square footage of the house versus moving the floor area around?
No, that was never. There's just certain things you can do with certain properties. When you have the downhill lot, the house is going to be about that size. If I shrink it up, economically speaking, it's just not feasible in this town.
Any other questions? Thank you. We'll get back to you on rebuttal. I have 2 cards for speakers. The first card I have is Lee Quintana.
Each speaker will get 3 minutes.
Lee Quintana, 5 Palm Avenue. Excuse me. I could talk about riparian corridors and whether the riparian corridor should be the setback line or that the setback comes from, or whether it should be the top of bank. I could talk about drainage and the fact that that hasn't been carefully studied yet. I could talk about a lot of other things, but I think it all boils down to the FAR and how you deal with that. There's several ways to look at the FAR. One is the way that it was done by staff. Another is to remove the riparian corridor from the total square footage and use the average slope of the remaining area to determine FAR. And I understand, according to staff, that would result in about 1,900 square feet. Another way to look at it would be using the figures that staff used. Since this was evaluated, I believe, against the Hillside Development Standards and Guidelines, deduct the square footage above 400 square feet for the garage. But in essence, this is a very difficult site. It has a lot of the stream bed, the riparian habitat. It's very steep. There's no spot on the site that has an LRD that would qualify as an LRDA or a slope less than 30%. This is a very difficult site, and to use the maximum allowed FAR does not make sense. That, we've always been told, is nominal. That's where you start. Doesn't make sense. And on this site, it doesn't make sense, and I think that the whole design needs to be designed to be smaller, not trying to take something that's already designed and trying to shrink it. And I would, that's about what I would say, but I would also ask whether or not the commission read the biological report by Woods Consulting, and where they have identified the riparian corridor and indicated that in most urban settings, at least a 10-foot setback from the corridor, not from the top of the bank, is used. And that on steeper slopes, sometimes that's extended. And that's reiterated again in...
30 seconds.
Okay. Reiterated again in the negative declaration for the University Avenue project. There is a very close association between riparian corridors or the areas near streams and the quality of the stream bed, even if work isn't going to be done within the stream. The whole idea is to protect the quality of the water and to protect the habitat.
Time.
Are there questions of the speaker? Thank you very much. The other card I have is from Citizen Ray.
Yes. Talk. It's green. Talk. Ooh, it's working. You can relax, Mr. Korb. You just lost your job. It's off and running. I guess those whacks I gave it helped. Relative to this matter. I went by and took a look at the property again, just to make sure I understood what was going on. You got a creek bed. One side is street level. The top of the bank on the other side is 30 foot higher than the creek bed. And the riparian corridor, the land use near creeks and streams stipulates, the way it's been mishandled so far, that there must be a 25-foot setback from the top of the bank before there's any construction. And the top of the bank on this property is 30 foot off the ground down below. But that's why you have theoretically a riparian corridor policy. And our new planning director, Rooney, has neglected to carry out her duty to find out what the town's riparian policy is, as required by law. It's been a year and a half since that duty has been turned over from the Stream Collaborative to the town. And Looney Tune Lawrence dragged his feet. And now we have a woman that took over Looney Tune's job, and she's dragging her feet. And we're going to get a nickname for her pretty soon. I mean, it is ugly. It is real ugly. Okay? So you have to understand. You go there and you see all these story poles right down in the riparian corridor. It's unbelievable. And nobody seems to give a damn from the staff. Maybe they don't understand the rules. Maybe they don't want to understand the rules. And should I ask, are they on the take? Should I do that? It's getting real ugly with this new woman. Thank you. Oh, one more thing. You know, well, I'll let it go at that, okay.
Any questions?
I don't want to wear out my welcome.
Any questions? Thank you. All right, the applicant has an opportunity to respond. You have up to 3 minutes.
On the plans, on our A1.1, it shows the riparian corridor. It shows we're 25-foot setback from high bank.
If you pull the microphone down a little bit, it would help us. Thank you.
Okay. On our A1.1 plan, it shows the riparian corridor. It also shows our 25-foot construction setbacks. It also shows, I think in the riparian corridor report, it says any canopy of any tree that sets within the riparian corridor, you have to be outside of that also. So you can see our riparian corridor goes out beyond the 25 feet. And the design that we have misses the riparian corridor totally. That's another reason why you can't step a house down the hill, because you'll get back into the riparian corridor.
Any other comments? Oh, do you have any other comments or last questions? Any questions? Thank you very much. There were no other speakers, and that concludes that. So I'll close the public hearing and ask for any comments or a motion from the Planning Commission. Commissioner Siak.
I do have a question of staff. Ms. Bailey, could you just clarify the square footage of how this site was calculated and whether the riparian corridor was deducted?
Excuse me, the riparian corridor was not deducted. The square footage was based on the slope. The slope of the lot is 37%, so we subtracted about 60% of the lot size. So the lot's about 20,000 square feet. We subtracted a little over 12,000 square feet to come up with a lot size about 8,000 square feet, and we calculated the FAR from the 8,000 square foot lot size.
And then a follow-up. The next question is, why wasn't the riparian corridor deducted?
It's not required. We don't interpret that it's required by town code. The reduction of the riparian corridor was intended to only be for doing densities when we do subdivisions. It is on our work program to develop a riparian corridor policy, and at that time we will consider that possibility of deducting the riparian area, and we will use this project as well as other projects for that analysis to see how that impacts the project. We have never imposed reducing the riparian corridor from any other project, and so this would be a special circumstance if we did it to this project.
And then just to follow up, just so that I understand it clearly, the reason why I ask is in our minutes from June 24th with the previous project at the Francis Oaks Way, it sounds like the reason the riparian corridor was deducted from that particular parcel was because it was a subdivision?
That would make sense, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? May we have a motion or some further discussion? Commissioner Bourgeois.
I'll go ahead and make a motion. I concur with staff's analysis, and I'll reiterate some comments I made at the last meeting. This is a very, very difficult lot, and I still think this is too much house. I feel like we're trying to put a square peg in a round hole on this lot. And I made this comment at the previous meeting. My specific request was to reduce the square footage. That was not necessarily the motion, but that was my specific comment. The motion was to reduce the bulk and mass, and that didn't happen. I haven't really heard substantial evidence to sway me from our previous opinion on that. So for those reasons, I am going to recommend denial based on those grounds.
In the staff report, they list general plan and town code. Do you want to incorporate any of that in the basic?
Yeah, and Do I need to state that, or when I think
you
I
just-
concur with staff's
right.
analysis
That's
as outlined in the staff report?
I understand that as an incorporation of staff's analysis.
That was my intent, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a second?
Yeah.
Yes, Commissioner Telesfor?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to support this because we did have comment last time about reducing the size of this house. Just because it's a difficult lot, I don't believe that we need to reduce our standards for development. And this is a really outstanding case of that. Whether it's far or not, we have a seller policy, and it should be reducing the visible mass. In this case, it's not at all. The visible mass is excessive from Jackson and totally changes, everything there is about that area. And I haven't even touched on riparian or the other red flags about this this proposal. So I will be seconding your motion.
Any further comments? I would just like to say that in looking at the photograph which is attached to the report today, we're looking at that house, and from that photograph, it isn't a photograph, it's a conceptualization, but in any event, it looks like 3 stories. So that doesn't help. So if there are no other comments, I would call the motion. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All those opposed? It carries unanimously.
Appeal rights. Anyone dissatisfied with the decision of the Planning Commission may appeal the decision to the Town Council. An appeal must be filed within 10 days. It must be filed upstairs in the Clerk Department. There are fees for filing an appeal.
All right, we're moving to item 3. I have no cards on item 3 except Citizen Ray, which is fine, but I don't have the applicant's card yet. Thank you. All right, I'll ask the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Associate Planner Joe Paulson will be presenting the staff report.
Good evening, Commissioners. On June 24th, the Planning Commission considered this matter, which is for a zone change from CM to CMPD to allow for the construction of an 86,345 square foot, 3-story mini storage facility. At the June 24th hearing, the Commission discussed a number of relevant issues to the proposed project that were not carried forward and reiterated in the current staff report. The details of those were discussed by the Commission, and they were also, again, included in the staff report. During the public testimony and the Commission discussion, issues were raised, and as a result of that, the Commission continued the matter to this evening with 5 items of direction. First, to provide additional information regarding the riparian corridor, to consider a design without a cellar element, to consider a design without a red roof, to provide additional information regarding the necessity of a caretaker's unit, and to provide additional information on the proposed community benefit and how the Commission should evaluate that. The applicant submitted a letter addressing those issues. However, the scope of the project overall hasn't changed other than the modification of the roof material to a rust brown color. Staff's also provided additional information in the staff report for this evening. As iterated at the last hearing, staff believes the Commission needs to carefully consider the 2 exceptions, which are for the on-site caretaker's residence and the front setback exception, the mass and scale of the proposed structure, neighborhood compatibility, the proposed community benefit, the proposed tree removals, and the proposed landscaping. The Commission should also consider whether the project is consistent with the general plan and the common design guidelines of the commercial design guidelines. Staff's carefully considered those issues, the Commission's direction, and the applicant's responses to those, to that direction. And as before, the staff believes that the project is appropriate and that the Commission should forward a recommendation to the Town Council for approval. Alternatively, the Commission could forward a recommendation to the Town Council recommending denial of the proposed project if they don't concur with staff's conclusions or other issues are brought up this evening. And that concludes staff's report, and we're available if you have any questions.
Are there questions of staff? Seeing none, I would ask the applicant to come forward. I have a card for Scott Wyckoff.
My name's Scott Wyckoff with Extra Space Storage. Appreciate the opportunity to be able to represent and discuss our project again. What we tried to do was outline in the letter the items that we took from the last Planning Commission meeting and respond to those directly. The first item that was brought up was the roof color, and that was a concern from the commission members. We don't have an issue with making some changes, so what we did is a rendering, and I think you have that in your packet. I don't know if we're up here yet or not, but we have a rendering we can show you that we chose a rust brown roof color that might be more compatible.
We do have a...
You have that in your packets?
We do have that in the package.
Okay. When we get, there we go, there's a better example of it, as opposed to the red roof. Also, we have some pictures we're going to show here in a minute as well that kind of show what the neighboring properties, design, and architecture is, and the type of materials that they have used as well. The next issue was the caretaker's unit and an explanation of the need for the caretaker's unit. But maybe I should say this first. We do have with us as well, this is Craig Mann, who's our project architect. This is Kendall Price, who is from Environmental Risk Specialties. And when we talk about we did some additional study on the riparian setback corridor and the general land use policies in relation to rivers and streams, so he's available. So I'm just going to hit the highlights, and if you have detailed questions I can't answer, they're available. This is Richard Tanner, who's over development for Extra Space, and he can answer additional questions about just storage in general or the caretaker's unit and some of those other things. So this is a group that's available for additional questions also to make you aware of. But we believe there are several important purposes for the caretaker's unit, and one of those issues is simply that one of the employees will be working on site, so that's one fewer vehicle trip, so they can walk to work as opposed to drive to work, and that reduces vehicle trips on the site. Another is that a lot of the existing facilities in Los Gatos have a caretaker's unit, and that's perceived as an amenity to our customers and desirable, so it allows us to remain competitive with the existing customers of other storage facilities who have that same amenity of an on-site caretaker's unit. Also, it allows our normally it's very neighborhood friendly. And in most of our facilities where we have this, our neighbors like the fact that there is someone on site there. Even though this is an industrial area where there's not residential homes around in that area, the fact that we have someone there who's in the unit, though they're not on full time as a watchman per se, but they are there and available to handle emergency situations. They're monitoring alarm systems, things like that, so that if there are any issues or problems that arise in the neighborhood area, they're there. It also provides some more ownership for the management of the facility, as that's as well as their home, and we hope a quality resident for the town of Los Gatos as well. Los Gatos Creek was discussed, and there was a desire to have more detailed analysis, specifically of the riparian setback corridor. We hired Environmental Risk Specialties, and they provided a document, I think, which you should have in your packet as well, okay, to study that corridor. And in essence, what we have is about 100, and I have an exhibit here I can show. If we can switch to the... Well, that's pretty... This exhibit just shows from an aerial photo. It's kind of hard to see those lines. But basically, this line here shows...
Oh, if you take the mic with you, it will help.
This line shows that the setback from the creek to the edge of our building, actually from the center line of the creek, is 184 feet and 7 inches. And it just shows some of the adjacent properties. This one, for example, to the Verizon building is 125 feet as it currently sits and stands. And so this is just a good representation to show and display how that setback from the creek is impacted. And if you have additional questions, again, we have Mr. Price here to answer those questions for you. The next item that we identified was the quantity of grading that was brought up. And we felt like in order to minimize the visual impact, mass, and scale of the building, that we wanted to include a cellar element. And that cellar element is something that is going to require the additional grading. This is an infill site, and the grading is going to occur on disturbed soil only. There's no virgin or natural ground that we're going to be grading in or disturbing. And I'll I'm just going to read what we have here. We're very conscious of the environmental impact of our project during the construction phases, and all consideration will be made to retain as much excess soil on the site and also make every effort to export the excess to the nearest site which would be requiring fill. And we're going to work and do what we can as we go through the construction drawing phase, if we have that opportunity, in order to minimize the grading as much as we can to still develop the facility. I think the next one and the biggest one is the mass and scale of the building that was discussed. We talked quite a bit last time, and we're prepared to discuss it again, just that we feel like there is a commercial and economic demand for this product in the market, and we feel like this market is underserved from some of the numbers that we discussed. The size of this facility for us is operationally and economically sustainable. We've opened a couple facilities recently. One was in Santa Clara, opened last week, and it was 93,000 square feet. Another one in San Jose is going to open next week, and it's actually 110,000 square feet. Just to give you an example of the new development projects that we're opening and have. 2 minutes, okay. If we can, and let's go to the pictures, Ray, and hopefully you'll give us a chance with some questions maybe to talk more about the mass and scale. What we try to do is kind of walk through the surrounding properties and neighborhoods so you get an example. We really tried to use okay, this is first of all what the building will look like from University Avenue. So if let's click through those, Ray, they've seen them. And then we have a sampling of the existing buildings. This is at the corner of Larkin University Avenue. And you can see the two-story building, the two-story footprint. And one thing I was trying to explain in my memo, and I'm not sure if I did, storage doesn't have to have a ceiling height that's as high as retail buildings or other buildings because we don't have a lot of the equipment and mechanical things there in between our stories. So our stories are more like 10 feet 6 instead of 12 or 13 feet like office buildings a lot of times are. So even though this is a two-story building, you can see the roof alone here is probably 6 to 8 feet above the top of the second story. And so even though ours is three-story, they are smaller stories. They don't have as much impact as maybe a three-story office building or others might. So let's go ahead and click through. This is across the street from us as you head up from Larkin University Avenue toward our project site. And that's a good example of tile. This shows the building that's directly next to us. And one important thing I wanted to point out is you can see how much parking and the number of cars there. As you read from our parking study, we only have 5 to 6 people at a time maximum at our site. So there's never a situation like this where there's 30, 40, 50, 60, 80, 100 cars on site with this type of use. Where if it was another industrial use that's compliant with that area, you know, there's incredible amount of parking and traffic impact. Okay, let's go through here. Okay, that's again across the street with the neighbors. This is the property directly next to our property. And we've got a couple different angles here. As you can see, multi-story building. This is the Verizon property, which is right next to us. And I want to talk about this, but you can see the story poles there that shows the height of our building. This is from the Verizon parking lot, like if my back was to the dam, looking down toward the property site. And you can see the height of that property as it relates to the road.
All right, apparently that is the time.
Okay.
Are there questions of the speaker? There are a couple of questions here. Let's start with Commissioner Jensen.
Mr. Wyckoff, aside from economic considerations, was there any reason not to reduce the mass and scale and square footage of the building?
Well, like I said, we feel like it meets the demand of the market, that it's there. And frankly, with the tough economic times, they have to, as we say, pencil or be viable in order to work for our, in order for us to build them.
Okay, let me just ask you my question one more time. Aside from the economic considerations which you've just reiterated, was there any reason not to reduce the scale and mass of the building?
That is the primary reason.
Thank you.
I would say also, though, we purchased the property with the understanding that this building is consistent with the height restrictions, the lot coverage ratios, and the other restricting size ratios for that property. That's why we bought the property when we originally analyzed it.
Thank you. I think that's responsive. Commissioner Bourgeois?
That was my question. So,
are there other questions? Seeing none, I will ask, we only have one card from anyone else, and that's Citizen Ray.
Aren't you glad you got at least one person out of 30,500 that gives a damn about the future of Los Gatos from a public interest standpoint and from the standpoint of coming down and giving testimony. Aren't you glad there's one person? Unbelievable. So, let me give you my analysis based on over 40 years of doing this kind of work. First off, to respond to Mr. Erickson's concern about the community benefit at the last meeting, I think community benefit, Charles, is a misnomer, okay? The proper admonition for community benefit in Los Gatos should be the town's shakedown. It's nothing more than a shakedown. If you want to do business in Los Gatos, we want something extra from you. And that's a shakedown, okay? Pure and simple. Also, on the negative side, as I said before, a recommendation by the staff is total abuse of the town code. The town code gives no authority to the planning director to make a discretionary judgment for or against, okay? The town code says investigate and report, and that is the job of the employee. And this new woman exceeds her charge and is extremely deceitful and dishonest. Furthermore, what has she done? She dropped out the former statement about the traffic impact policy, okay? Dropped it out of this meeting. Let me read it to you. Town's traffic impact policy requires preparation of a traffic study for any project with the potential to generate 20 or more additional AM or PM peak trips. When traffic generated by the previous use is taken into account,
30
the
seconds.
proposed project will result in a net increase in traffic. The proposed project would generate a net increase of approximately 216 average daily trips. Can you believe that? 216. This monster building for self-storage is designed to serve the region. Its location will bring in regional business, okay, to Los Gatos.
Time.
What do we need this excess traffic for?
Thank you, Citizen.
What do we need it for?
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Always happy to be of service.
Are there any questions of the speaker? Thank you. There are no questions. The applicant now has up to 3 minutes for rebuttal.
Thank you. Well, in response to Citizens Ray comments, this is more of a local facility. That's why we have another one in Santa Clara and everywhere else. They serve the local. We have a 1 and 3 mile radius that we look at the demographics to determine the use of those sites.
No comments, please, Citizen Ray.
But if we can pull the slideshow back up, I understand the mass and scale is an issue. We've tried to really design the project so that impact is lessened. We're doing 360-degree architectures. You can see the buildings next to us. One is essentially a metal building. The other one is just a white painted tilt-up concrete building. You know, all those items are expensive to do to make it viable and successful. And even though it sounds, you know, it might sound negative or bad, but economically it does have to work in order to function. And if this is a site that's to be developed, something has to be built there. And this is a relatively low impact as far as the traffic, parking, and those other issues are concerned. This is just an example to help you understand the scale. This is standing on our property looking at the neighboring property. That's how much lower we are than the neighbor is. The street's even actually going up higher in front of our property, their property. So the visual impact is even significantly less than the impact of this building who's next door to us. And if you look at the architecture and the effort and time we put into the creation of that, I think I'll demonstrate as well. It's hard to see on the slide, but about where this thing is, this is standing across the street. That's about the roof of the building. So it does not look like a big monster building over there. That's the roof of the building. You can see it's buffered by all those trees. Okay, keep going, Ray. Let's hit a few more of these. Again, you can see it a little better right in there. For a little bit, you can see the story poles a little bit there. So our height is not, if not the same as the building next door to us, it's pretty equal too. Okay, let's move forward, Ray. This is the building directly across the street, looking at it from the road as you're driving down the street. And you can see how high that is. That's going to be much, much higher than our property is. Okay. Okay, these are some properties that are further down, past the reservoirs. You're coming back into town. And we can show you a couple of these, because there's a great example of a 3-story building that is kind of a similar situation. That's the back of this building that's a 3-story building in Los Gatos. There's a big complex there on University Avenue, just down the street from where our project is. So let's see if there might be another one of that. So you can get an idea on the back scale. In the front of that building, you can actually see the full 2 stories. And not only can you see the full 2 stories, but the 2 stories are at least 3, 4, 5 feet higher because they're a retail, not retail, they're a commercial type of use than our storage facility is. We only have
30 seconds.
15 feet roughly. There we go. We would appreciate your consideration. We understand the concerns to make the project, the mass and scale fit. We feel like the demand is there. The area, the market is underserved. We feel like this size facility is sustainable. We feel like at this size we can provide the product that you'd be proud to have in your town. And we feel like the impacts can be buffered by the architectural features we put in, how it sits in the site, and how that site carries and supports the building.
Thank you. Are there questions of the speaker? There being none, we'll close the public hearing.
Thank you.
All right. May I have comments or a motion? Does anyone want to say anything? Commissioner Bourgeois?
I'll make a couple comments first. I want to hear what my fellow commissioners have to say before any motions are made. But on the 2 exceptions we have to make, one, the on-site caretaker's unit and the front setback, I believe I can make the findings for both of those. I think it makes sense to have an on-site caretaker's unit. We've made that exception for other similar uses in town. I don't have a problem with that one. The reduction in the front setback, I actually think it makes sense in this location for a couple of reasons. One, because of the grade differential between the road and the parcel. I think it makes sense to back the building up in that direction. And also, it increases your riparian corridor setback. So I think those 2 exceptions make sense. I know a lot of my fellow commissioners were concerned about the mass and scale of this building. And I've kind of mixed feelings about it. I should disclose I work in the vicinity. I drive past this at least twice a day. I know the site very, very well. And if there's any site that's appropriate for this use, I think this is it. It really is a sunken site, and this architecturally, this is going to be a huge upgrade to the other buildings on that side of the street. So I feel it is compatible with the neighborhood, and I'm in agreement with the community benefit, and so I'm probably in support of this project.
I'd like to make a comment too, then if anybody else has any more. I would just like to say, when you're asked a question, is there anything besides the economic reason for this, that is not to suggest that an economic reason is a bad reason. It's just to distinguish other issues too. So I don't think we're trying to suggest to you that economics is something the applicant should ignore at all. That having been said, and I'm not trying to second guess Commissioner Jensen, but I would be surprised if the commission felt that somehow economics should not be considered by an applicant. And you seem to think perhaps we were suggesting that. I happen to agree with Commissioner Bourgeois. I could see how a buyer in looking at this would look what they could build there. What you're proposing to build, I think, conceptually is something that you could build there. Clearly, the commission has a right to impose other conditions or suggestions, and I'm not trying to suggest we don't. But having looked at the possibility of uses there and the perhaps lower impact of this use, I think it is a lower impact, and your design, which is, I think, considerably better than some of the other buildings that are already built there, it does seem to me to be an improvement. And it does, whether it serves the need in the community, and in a sense is not, the Planning Commission has to consider that, but that is not really our job to determine what the need in the community is, except to say there ought to be a need, otherwise why is it being done? So that having been said, I just wanted to say I do support the reasons stated by Commissioner Bourgeois. Now, were there other comments? Commissioner Erickson.
Yes, I would just reiterate my agreement with Commissioner Bourgeois on the exceptions about on-site caretaker's unit and the front setback exceptions. And I do think the mass and scale of the building causes some concern for me, but I think the building actually complies with the applicable town guidelines in this zone with regard to lot coverage and with the height limitations, so we need to be sure we acknowledge that, I believe. And the topography of the site actually mitigates against the apparent mass and scale of the experience of mass and scale of human beings as they would interact, drive by the site and so forth. And the screening and landscaping that's naturally there and that is proposed as part of the project mitigates against that, as well as the colors of the project. So I think that it's a reason that the mass and scale, while it still is a concern, there are a series of mitigating factors that make it not as apparent a problem as it might otherwise be.
Thank you. Commissioner Telesfor, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'll weigh in here. First of all, thank you very much for being sensitive to the architecture and especially with the roof concern that we had. I'm probably more troubled by the volume with this building, both above and below ground. And it's 3 stories plus a basement. And we're being asked to approve an 86,000 square foot building, and for the use that of course, it's low intensity. But here's what, when I was reviewing the general plan at 2.4.2, we have to consider that the 35 height limit is not only for the purpose of architecture, but it's also for the purpose of intensity. So stay with me on this for just a minute, because I started to think about this. And you know, oftentimes buildings outlive their initial uses. So I'm looking forward a little bit, and I'm trying to think, we're going to end up with a 3-story building with a basement. In 10 years, if somehow the use is deemed to change, which I'm not against any office building or R&D building, but I'm concerned then about any more traffic there or the parking that we may not have if the building goes to more of an intense use. Now, I don't know, are we leaving this as, if we say this is storage, this will be a storage building, period? Maybe I don't understand that.
Could I just respond to one thing so we get the whole shooting match here? Perhaps I misunderstood it, but as I understand the way this building is designed, it is not designed to function as an office or other use specifically because of the way it's designed. And perhaps I'm wrong on this, and I don't know if staff can respond to this, but if you took that building and tried to convert it into a 3-story office building, you'd have to increase the height of the building. And they can't do that without coming back before us. Perhaps they could turn it into a 2-story building. I don't know, but it sounds like this is fairly much a single-use building.
Right.
I don't mean to suggest some use couldn't be made, but clearly I don't think you could simply convert it to a 3-story other use.
Well, and I'd like to clarify that.
The application, as you know, is a PD application, and that will specify the use of the site for storage if it's approved by yourselves and by the town council. The only way the use could change is if the PD amendment or the PD zoning is amended, which means another ordinance has to come through, a rezoning. So it would not be a simple thing to change.
Which would also require, obviously, the evaluation of traffic and for the proposed use and parking.
Okay, so, all right, well then that would be that is my concern, and it would be regarding just the site intensity in the future. So I don't know where I'm standing on this. I'm going to sit here and think about it for
You have a couple moments before we have a motion, I think.
Yeah.
Do we have Commissioner Jensen?
I wanted to first thank Commissioner O'Donnell because my question is directed towards, as you were listening to the project before you, there's often considerations for mass and scale and square footage which have to do with siting, architecture, land, riparian corridors, all of which have to do with your site. So, of course, economics are a consideration, and we don't expect them to be ignored. However, we do try to ask questions. That being said, I agree almost wholeheartedly with Commissioner Bourgeois' comments. This is a very unique site, and because you are at a level that is so below grade, you are fortunate because your giant building is not that easily seen from the street. The one thing I will say, and I want to assure everyone that I fully understand what the community benefit policy is. I understand what the requirements are. But if this should go forward to the town council, I want to make a comment that I at least have some question about whether, and perhaps this can be taken up at some point, and I would hope that it would be, whether an improvement or a change or a contribution to a site that, at least to my mind, has no nexus to the development. I have real trouble in, and I understand the policy, I have real trouble in justifying for myself that that's a community benefit that is somehow offsetting the traffic impact of the building in that area. That being said, I will be silent on community benefit.
Are there any other comments? If there are not, may we have a motion? There's a lot of good comments. We must have a motion. Commissioner Bourgeois.
All right. I will make the motion that we find this plan development is consistent with the general plan and the common design guidelines of the commercial design guidelines, which were in Exhibit 2, and as required by the town's traffic policy for community benefit, that we find the community benefit proposed adequate as per the policy, maybe not for our personal preference, but and also that this body would forward a recommendation of approval to the town council for the following: that we can make the mitigated negative declaration and the mitigation monitoring program, and a recommendation of approval for the plan development application.
Is there a second? Commissioner Sayak seconds. Is there discussion? I'll call the question then. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? One opposition, so it's 5-1.
And for those following the application, the action of the Planning Commission is a recommendation to the Town Council to approve the zone change application. By the Town Code, the recommendation will automatically be scheduled for a hearing before the Town Council. That hearing will be noticed according to law, follow the notices, and there will be a hearing probably in September. First or second meeting in September, most likely second meeting.
Thank you. There is no continued other business that I'm aware of. So what we have remaining then would be a report from Ms. Rooney on, now that the honeymoon is over.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was a brief honeymoon. I actually have 2 items for you tonight. The first is a very exciting announcement. You may have heard me introduce Sandy as our interim Assistant Community Development Director, and that is my first announcement. It's that Sandy has been appointed to that position. She'll be in that position for the next 6 months, and at that time, if the budget allows, we'll then go out for a formal recruitment process, of which we hope that Sandy will participate in that. But this gives her time to see if she likes the job, and we're sending her for some great training to help prepare her for the job, and she'll be basically responsible for the current planning process in the department, and then I'll be transitioning into the long-range plan, principally on the general plan, housing element, and the North 40. But you'll still see me. We're going to be sharing Planning Commission duties, and you'll probably see me in the audience even when I'm not sitting in the hot seat, as we call it. So that was very exciting news. The other news, I think most of you probably are aware, we have a number of furlough days that we'll be experiencing over the next year. I think it's 5 total. One just happened to fall on our Planning Commission hearing meeting that's set for November 11th, and we did poll the Planning Commission to see what night works best for them, and the majority responded that November 18th is the best night. I think we have all but one member who won't be able to attend that evening. And I understand that we typically cancel the meeting before Thanksgiving, so November 18th will be our only meeting for November 18th will be the only November meeting. That's all I have for you tonight.
All right, that's very good news about Sandy. Are there any commission comments on commission matters? There being none, I think we can adjourn. The meeting is adjourned.